Uh, Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Chamber's annual monthly forum, sponsored by, of course, the Chamber of Commerce of La Crosse area. I'm Joe Heim, the moderator of the forum. Today's program features 3rd Congressional Congressman Ron Kind, fresh off his November re-election victory. I did a little counting. It's starting his 14th term, first elected in 1996. He, as I think everybody knows, represents Western Wisconsin in the House of Representatives, a 2-year term. I will note that we also invited Senators Johnson and Senators Baldwin. Neither were able to join us today, but we'll have them at a future forum, likely in the spring sometime. Also online is Mike Holland, who represents Senator Ron Johnson, and he will answer any questions as well. Before we start, Maggie, do you have any special announcements for the Chamber?
I do have just a couple. Thank you, Joe. But before that, I want to just send regrets from Neil Zigerlicki, our CEO. He was hoping to join us today, but he's currently presenting to another community organization. Our first announcement is just a reminder that the grant application period for our Building Community Grant Fund closes this Friday, January 15th. And as a reminder, that fund is offering grants to small businesses in the area that have been impacted by COVID-19. Right now, that fund has raised just under $280,000. However, the need is really large in our community, so we are still welcoming contributions of any size from individuals or businesses. So I will add in the chat in just a minute the link for more information, whether you want to apply for a grant or are interested in making a contribution. The second and final announcement is just a save the date for our annual meeting. That will be happening Monday, March 8th, and we will be doing it all virtual. And we have a couple of special additions this year to the program, one of those being a nationally recognized keynote speaker. So mark your calendars now, Monday, March 8th, and then keep an eye out on your inbox later this week for some additional information. And with that, Joe, I will pass it back to you and to Congressman Kind.
Okay, thank you, Maggie. I'm just going to mention the format for today. We're going to ask Congressman Kind to come up with an opening statement and maybe bring us up to date as to what's going on. I was amazed how much stuff is happening in the last few hours even. We'll then go to Q&A from the audience. We have about 12 to 15 questions that were submitted in advance. So we'll do that. And I think if you wish, you can do a question through chat as well. Maggie will bring those up if we are able to do that. So it will conclude about 1 o'clock. So that's what we're going to do today. First of all, I'd like to welcome Congressman Kind back to the forum. It's great to have you again, and it's great that you're in good health and doing well. Congressman Kind.
Well, thank you, Joel. Thank you so much for emceeing this. Maggie, thank you for all your hard work there. And even though he's not with us, special welcome to Neil Zigerlicki. Looking forward to meeting him, but welcome him to the larger La Crosse Chamber family. And hopefully we'll be able to connect soon. But thank you all for joining us. I see Joe Billings has joined us too, our wonderful state rep here from La Crosse. I didn't see Brad Paff or Steve Doyle, Brad being the newly elected state senator from the area, and also Mr. Doyle. Did see Jen Schilling, who joined us, former state senator. It's always nice to see her. And Roz, thank you so much for that background. It looks so peaceful and so soothing right now. So I'm enjoying that. But listen, you're muted right now, Roz, so I didn't pick up all that. But listen, last week was last week. I'm sure there's not much I can add to what unfolded in Washington, but Joe, let me just say this. I'm making a prediction that 2021 is going to be a better year than 2020. It has to be. 2020 was pretty god-awful. Even though last week didn't get us off to the greatest start as a nation, I'm still hopeful that there's light at the end of the tunnel with this coronavirus, with the hopefully rapid deployment of the vaccine that is starting to take place. I just literally got off a Zoom call with all of our healthcare providers in the congressional district, getting an update from them on how battle against the virus is going, but also the rollout of the vaccine and the additional resources and help that they need to do that as quickly and as efficiently as possible. But I am very confident that we have a safe and effective vaccine that will protect people from the virus and the spread of the virus. And we're going to need to get people inoculated as quickly as possible. That's the best way of establishing herd immunity. That's going to be the best way of fully and completely opening up our economy the way all of us want it. It's going to be the best way to return all the kids to the classroom and for all of us to start resuming a normal lifestyle again. And this last year has been very difficult for everyone, but especially our frontline healthcare workers who have done an incredible job battling this with fatigue setting in right now. And we have more work to do. I'm hoping that there will be a stronger federal partnership established in the coming days to work with our states and local communities to do this well and to do it efficiently. And I know that's what the new administration is pledging. Their number one, number two, number three priority is vaccine deployment so that we can protect people and open up our nation's economy and get going again. I know there's a lot of pent up energy to do it, but in the meantime, there's still a lot of people struggling, and I certainly recognize it. And that's why I worked so hard to get the additional COVID package done, which we did at the end of last year. Additional PPP funding for small businesses who are struggling. I especially worked hard to make sure that our family farmers qualified for the P3 program because they're small businesses like any other small business, and we got that accomplished. Additional resources for our healthcare providers in dealing with the virus, but also now with vaccine deployment, and additional help for our schools, given the additional cleaning expenses that they're incurring in order to bring children back into the classroom again. And then other measures too that I thought were important on the tax side that we were able to do with the expiring extenders that had to be done. I was the lead author to make sure that excise taxes didn't snap back and hit our local brewers or wineries or distilleries here in Wisconsin. That too is a large part of our Wisconsin. And we were able to permanently fix that in the end of the year budget package that we were able to bring up and pass. So there was a flurry of activity at the end of last year, not just the COVID additional assistance, but the year-end budget too, that I think is going to provide a lot of help and relief here at the local level. And looking forward to 2021, where do we need to be focused? There are a few areas that I'm going to continue to focus on. I've been serving on a national broadband task force, and the coronavirus has highlighted the digital divide and the economic and education inequities that flow from the digital divide. Just heard from our providers how much they love telehealth services. But to do that well, we need broadband expansion in every inch of our territory to make sure it's available. And this is also the lifeline to our rural communities. They don't have high-speed internet connection. That is where the 21st century economy is. They're going to be left behind, and our rural communities are going to suffer as a consequence. So we're going to continue to stay focused on that. I'm still on the health subcommittee. And my main focus has been taking steps to reduce the cost of healthcare for everyone, understanding that while we have a great healthcare system, it's still too expensive. We're still spending too much from our family budgets, our business budgets, to our state and local communities. More can be done to accelerate different payment options, different payment models in healthcare, and making sure that we're getting a healthy population, which is essential to grow the economy. I'm hoping that we're going to be able to move forward on a bipartisan infrastructure investment bill. And to be included in that is major funding for broadband expansion. We're long past due to rebuild Wisconsin and rebuild America again. And if you don't have that foundation of a strong infrastructure, it's tough to have an expanding, sustainable economy from it. And then as a proud rep of 6 of our state universities, Viterbo here in La Crosse, 4 of the tech schools, access to higher education, affordability to higher education, whether it's our vocational education programs or 4-year campuses that we have, is going to be important as we move forward in this 21st century global economy. So we have the higher ed bill that's up for reauthorization. And as a child of benefiting from need-based financial aid programs, I want to make sure that we're expanding those programs and making it available for all our children. I don't want to be one of those reps that pulls the ladder up from behind me and tells the next generation, tough luck, you're on your own. And that, I think, is going to be one of the chief challenges, Joe, as we emerge from the coronavirus, is workforce shortages. We were experiencing that before the virus hit, and it's certainly going to be prominent coming out of this coronavirus too, is how do we address the workforce needs to hit our GDP growth targets and a growing economy, and to be able to sustain that. We have 70 million baby boomers retiring en masse, many of them obviously leaving that workforce today. We don't have a baby boom following on their heels. So we're going to be experiencing a really tight labor supply in the years to come. And we're going to have to be creative in coming up with policies to address that workforce shortage if we're going to meet the needs of businesses large and small and hit our growth targets as a country. One answer to that, and I hope this is another thing we can come back and address in Congress, is comprehensive immigration reform. We have a broken immigration system that's holding us back as a country, and we're long past due to depoliticize that hot topic, come to grips with the immigration needs that we have as a country, and address that. And hopefully we'll have a chance to do that in this session of Congress. So that's just a few, Joe. Let me just leave it there because I know you've got some questions that have come in already, and with the remaining time, I want to try to get to as many of those as we can. But thank you.
Hey, thank you, Congressman. First question, and this is, you sort of talked a little bit about this. What are your thoughts and opinions regarding congressional processes and outcomes regarding January 6th? And particularly, what do you see as a schedule for the next week or two?
Well, that's a good question. Listen, last week I did call for the president to step down. I do believe that his current state of mind, he presents a clear and present danger to our country. And if there's any decency left in him, for the sake of our nation, if he could just step down, turn it over to Vice President Pence to handle the transition of power that we need right now, the peaceful transition of power, that I think would be the best outcome. And trust me, given how my phone line has been lit up from a lot of my Republican friends in Congress, they would prefer that option too. But barring that, I know we're going to be moving forward this week on asking the Vice President to have that difficult conversation with the president's cabinet about invoking the 25th Amendment. I think the president's in a very dark place right now, especially the days that followed the election and what he's been trying to perpetrate in this country that we saw manifest itself in our nation's capital last Wednesday. But short of that, I know there's 10 days left or so left in this administration, but there really does need to be accountability for inciting mob rule and for a siege on our nation's capital. And so articles of impeachment have been drafted, just one article in particular, and we'll see as this week unfolds whether that will be taken up or not. But of course, the president could take care of all this right now if he were just to resign, step down early, and turn it over to Vice President Pence then.
Thank you. The second question has to do with committee assignments. My understanding is you're going to be in Ways and Means again. Are you going to be on any other committees? And by the way, one of the questions, thank you for your work on Ways and Means over the last couple of years, which they felt there was, I'm not going to get into the details, but they thought it was particularly important. So comment on your committee assignments.
Yeah, you know, I'm planning on staying. I am going to be on Ways and Means Committee. You know, it's one of the most coveted committees in all of Congress, in both the House and the Senate. Most of the economic issues that jurisdiction crosses our desk, along with trade policy, tax code, Social Security, Medicare, healthcare. So it's a good committee for the district and state that I represent. And it's called an exclusive committee, Joe. You may be familiar with this, but if you serve on Ways and Means, because it's such a powerful committee to begin with, you're not allowed to serve on any other committees in Congress. And so I'm going to be continuing there. I've been able to garner enhanced seniority now on the committee, which is helpful. But I'm also one of the most bipartisan members of that committee. And as we move forward from the carnage of January 6th, we're going to need more of that, I think, rather than less of it. The ability to reach across, find those areas of common ground that we can work on together, get things done in a bipartisan, and begin the healing of our nation that's desperately needed. I think I can play a unique role in helping that, given the relationships that I've established across the aisle throughout the years.
Next question, having to do with insights on the vaccine rollout. President Biden has indicated he wants to accelerate that and increase the federal role in that area. Do you have any additional comments about the federal role in it and expectations about when the vaccine is going to be due? As you probably know, Wisconsin is not leading the Midwest in number of vaccines and distribution.
Yeah, Joe, there's no question there has to be a stronger federal partnership with state and local communities, and it just hasn't been there. And as I said, I just got off the Zoom call with all our healthcare providers earlier this morning, and they were all expressing frustration of that lack of coordination and assistance. But they're also asking for greater flexibility so they can get more of that vaccine out in their community quicker, which I agree with. But we also need to ensure that there is that supply chain following right behind it for that second booster shot, which is important too, that we don't run into shortfalls. So those calculations are being made right now. We're getting assurances from the pharmaceutical companies, Pfizer and Moderna in particular, that they can meet the demand if we get the vaccines out sooner rather than later. But I would like to see enhanced flexibility to our local providers, especially in the rural areas and the non-affiliated providers. This has been a problem for them to get on the vaccine list. So there has to be greater coordination with them as well. And then I think we all have a role to play when it comes time when we're eligible to be vaccinated to do so. You know, not only for the sake of our own health, but for our loved ones and for the community at large. Because herd immunity isn't going to work if only half the population decides to get vaccinated. We're going to have to deal with the tragedy of this virus for a long time to come if we have too many people resisting it. I am completely confident, based on all the evidence I've seen, the research, the clinical trials that have taken place, that the vaccines that are being deployed are safe and effective. And we're seeing that now through the inoculated population. Other than a handful of adverse side effects, mainly due to allergy reaction, by and large, this has been incredibly safe and effective, and we're not seeing any adverse health consequences. So we're all in this together, and we have the ability to open up this economy, get our schools open, getting back to some sense of normalcy again, if we get vaccinated when it becomes available to us.
Next question, do you have any thoughts on President-elect Biden's cabinet picks? Several from the Midwest. Any thoughts about difficulty in getting any of them confirmed?
Well, I think that difficulty is a little less today than it was before the Georgia special elections, because now the Democrats will have the ability to bring up those nominees for consideration and have a vote on all of them on the Senate floor. And I'm confident, given the bipartisan support for virtually all of them, that he's going to be able to get most of his cabinet put in place. And listen, I've through the years gotten to know most of them. They are very professional, very competent, experienced people that can help lead these federal agencies. And I think we need that now too, because we've seen an erosion of that degree of expertise and professionalism over the last few years in the federal agencies. And that's made it more difficult then to do oversight and to monitor and to execute these programs that they're in charge of. But I was especially happy to see that my good friend Tom Vilsack from Iowa is going to be the agriculture secretary again. I worked closely with him through the years. He understands the challenges that we have that are unique to the upper Midwest, especially with production agriculture. So I'm glad to see him coming back to USDA for another stint there.
Next question having to do with Democratic control of Congress. In the 50-50 Senate, the role of moderates governing from the middle versus the influence of the far left or far right. Do you think that the moderates are going to prevail in a lot of the more extreme proposals that you hear about? Or will the...
I do, Joe, and I'm going to do everything in my power to ensure that we do too, because listen, even though Democrats will technically be in charge of the Senate now because of the Georgia runoff, it's still 50-50 there. And it's virtually 50-50 in the House too. That can lead to one of two results: either complete paralysis and gridlock over the next couple of years, or more work to try to find the sensible center and find common ground. And I hope it's the latter. And given the feedback that I've had with many of my Republican colleagues, they're looking for opportunities to be able to work in that type of bipartisan fashion. Again, I think the federal government and even Madison needs more of that now more than ever these days. So I'm hoping there'll be more like-minded people serving in these roles. I know we're lucky with the state representatives that we have back home, from Jill to Steve. I know Brad Paff is committed to finding that common ground and those avenues of bipartisan support. And we need more of that these days. And I'm going to do my best to ensure that happens out in Washington.
Do you have any district-centric priorities or issues that you're working on specifically? I know you kind of touched on some of these, but if you want to repeat them, you're welcome to do it.
Yeah, rural broadband in general is so crucial, and it's had a disparate impact in this part of the state in particular. I'm still co-chairing the Rural Health Care Coalition in Congress, and there are unique challenges that our rural providers face. Again, I mentioned the higher ed institutions that we have that we're blessed with that can help ignite this economy and make sure that our kids have the skills, lifelong learning habits that they need in a very competitive global economy too. The infrastructure needs that I mentioned previously too, we're falling behind, and this could be a great jobs program emerging from the virus. And then budget-wise, to me, it starts and stops with healthcare spending, and there's more that we can be doing. And I'm heading this healthcare innovation caucus. It's bipartisan, and we're really focused on alternative payment measures in the healthcare system, so that we're paying for the quality or the value of the outcome of care that's given, rather than the volume of services and procedures and things that have been bankrupting our nation and oftentimes leading to bad results at a high cost. So there's a way of addressing healthcare affordability, and that touches virtually every aspect of our lives. Unfortunately, we have healthcare providers in our area that get this, and they've shown those coordinated patient-centered healthcare models that work well, and they want to be rewarded based on the results that they produce, rather than this fee-for-service system that's bogged down the healthcare system for too long. So those are just a few on the domestic front. I'm also co-chairing the U.S.-UK Interparliamentary Working Group. We have an important bilateral trade negotiation taking place with one of our strongest allies in the world, Great Britain. They're now emerging from Brexit, and it's important that they have a strong, viable economy, and we've always enjoyed close working relationship with them. And I'm co-chairing the US-EU caucus, another group of like-minded, value-laden democratic nations that we need good, strong trade relations with. And so I'm going to obviously play an important role in getting our trade agenda back on the rails again, so that it's not hurting our farmers and manufacturers back home here in Wisconsin.
Next question has to do with the elections. Currently, there's a significant amount of distrust in our election process. What actions would you recommend or propose that we could help restore trust and transparency in elections?
Yeah, unfortunately, the reason there's so much distrust is because of the purveyor of the big lie, that somehow the last election was fraught with election fraud, and that's not to be trusted, when all the facts and all the evidence contradict that. In fact, 60 courts now, state and federal, have dismissed the complaints that the Trump administration has brought repeatedly since the election, including Trump-appointed judges dismissing these cases with great admonition, too, by pointing out that there are no facts or evidence to substantiate these allegations. So I think it's important as we move forward, especially in light of last Wednesday, that elected officials stop spreading the big lie that's led to the incitement of this mob out in Washington. And I'm really worried about that, Joe, for our democracy, is that an alternative reality has been created based on lies and misrepresentation to the American people. And too many people are believing it now, even though there's no basis in fact for it. And we have to figure this out, because if we can't even agree on the same set of facts, I'm not sure how we come together to agree on policy and the big challenges that we're facing as a nation today. And that's, I think, one of the root causes to what we saw last Wednesday, is too many people came to Washington in the mistaken belief that somehow the election was stolen and that they had to overturn the election results, including, I might add, my opponent from last year. Mr. Van Orden was out there with that mob last week demanding to have a meeting with me So I would vote to sustain the objection to overturn the election result. And that was the basis for the incitement that took place.
Question about elections related to that. Do you favor or support the voting option of ranked choice voting or final five voting? I know there's a group in Wisconsin that is proposing, called Democracy Found, proposing one of those.
Yeah, I don't know if Lee Rush is on right now on the virtual too, but I just had a virtual meeting with him and some of those that were talking about that and got more information about what they were hoping to accomplish. And it actually might be an issue, and Jill, I'm sure, is familiar with it, that might come up in the state legislature. The states determine the election rules and the election regulations. So it's really going to be a question for our state reps to have to answer rather than me, because the federal government plays a very small ancillary role, more about providing resources for the fair and accuracy of elections rather than the rules of the election. So I encourage people, if they have an interest in this, get in touch with Jill and Steve and Brad now to get their thoughts too. But I also noticed that the bill being drafted in Madison, Joe, would only apply to federal elections, not to state elections. So someone's got to explain that to me if they want to move forward on a new system of electing people, that it's only going to apply to the federal races and not also to state races in Wisconsin. But for me, I have always believed that the simpler you can make things, including voting, is what we ought to be focused on. And if ranked choice or other variations of electing people become too complicated, you run the danger of turning people off because it's just too complicated, and they will feel that they don't have enough information to make a reasoned choice then. So that too, I think, needs to be a part of the consideration of any legislation moving forward.
Thank you. Question about redistricting. Do you favor any reforms in the redistricting area? And secondarily, your thoughts about your own district as to what could or might change in the when redistricting is done?
Yeah, Joe, I've always been a longtime advocate for allowing nonpartisan judicial panels to draw the political map. Right now, the way our legislative districts get determined are by the politicians. They get to draw the map. They get to carve out their particular districts. And I think that's just fundamentally contrary to the concept of democracy. The people are supposed to choose the representatives, not the other way around. And with gerrymandering and the way it's been rigged in the past, there's been a lot of carve out of districts. And that too, I think, has led to the polarization of our political system. There are just too many districts that are way too red or way too blue. And there's very little incentive then for those representatives to try to work in a bipartisan fashion and reach common ground, because their base doesn't want them to do that. I've been blessed in representing a district that's pretty down the middle, pretty 50-50, and it's always been that way. And I wish there were more districts like that throughout the country, because if there were, there would probably be more representatives such as myself, who's consistently ranked as one of the most independent, one of the most bipartisan members of Congress, and willing to work with my colleagues across the aisle to get things done. And we need to get back to that if this democracy of ours is going to survive. And having a nonpartisan redistricting panel put together the map, I think would go a long ways of getting a more accurate representation.
Thank you. Question, the last COVID relief bill was over 6,500 pages long. Very few, if any, legislators read the entire bill. Should expenditures for all bills be listed at the front? And if there's a particular proposal from a particular legislator, should their name be attached to that proposal?
Yeah, let me first correct it. It wasn't just the COVID bill that was that long. It was the entire federal budget that got passed at the end of the year, and COVID. They were all part of the same legislation that came up for consideration. Now, the House had passed 13 separate appropriation bills throughout the year. So what was in the year-end package was work that we did through hearings and markups and debate on the floor. The Senate didn't take up any of those appropriation bills, but the groundwork for the year-end package was done. And we were very familiar with all that work that preceded the bill on the floor. And that was true for COVID too. There were long discussions taking place of what would be included in the final COVID package. And even though none of us had a chance to go through 6,000 pages of legalese in the waning hours of last year, All of us were familiar with what was going to be in that package, given the state of negotiations. And we have to rely on staff to make sure that what was agreed on was accurately reflected on the final legislative page. And that is just the cost of trying to get things done at the last minute. That's again, it's one of the reasons why I supported the Heroes COVID package about 8 months ago, so that we'd have time to deliberate and negotiate. But unfortunately, we couldn't get the Senate or the administration to engage, not until after the election and only at the last minute. And that's why this process looks so god awful. And I wish we could have done it more through regular procedure than this year-end rush. But unfortunately, given the state of politics, that apparently was the best some could do at the last minute.
One of the issues associated with COVID has to do with immunity, and particularly immunity for businesses, educators, and other healthcare people. How do you feel about that issue in general? It's both a federal issue, but also a state issue.
Yeah, it really is. And listen, I've come out in support of limited liability protections for any institution that are taking the right steps to protect their workforce and people coming into their business. But here's the rub, Joe. In order to earn that protection, I believe there has to be certain mandated precautions that these institutions or businesses are doing in order to check the box to prove that they've taken all the necessary precautions to qualify for the immunity. And that's something that most businesses didn't want. They wanted blanket immunity, but they didn't want to be told what they needed to do to protect people. Now, you can't have it both ways, because then you're going to have a hard time separating those who in good faith are doing everything they can based on the best healthcare guidance, CDC, FDA, or otherwise, or if it's just going to be the honor system. And that's where negotiations broke down, that we could have gotten limited liability protection done, but there had to be some requirements that businesses were willing to take. And I know it's uncomfortable requiring people to wear masks or certain people to wear masks, but that was going to be one of the asks. And you'd get pushback from employees or from customers who are just refusing to take even those preliminary steps. But without that, I don't know how you extend that type of legal protections moving forward. There's still a chance to go back and address it and figure out a way to do it, because I think it would be helpful if we can find a landing zone to this.
Years ago, Congressman Kind, you talked about Paygo as a budget reform, and is our budget deficits basically going to be as far as the eye can see? Is this a dead issue today, or is Paygo still a viable option?
Well, we just passed the rules package, Joe, at the beginning of this year's session of Congress. Paygo has been reinstituted in it once again. The one exception is any COVID relief that has to go out in order to address the coronavirus specifically. But beyond that, pay-as-you-go budgeting is the rule. And for those who aren't familiar with Paygo budgeting, it's as simple as this. If you're going to offer a spending increase or a tax cut, you have to find an offset in the budget to maintain balance. And it's worked. It worked in the late 1990s during the second Clinton administration. That gave us 4 years of budget surpluses where we were paying down the national debt rather than adding to it. And it was an incredibly healthy economic dynamic. But also it was important we did that right before 9/11 and the tremendous expense that followed the terrorist attack on our country. Because we were in surpluses, paying down the national debt, fiscally, we were in a much better position to address that crisis. But unfortunately, in recent years, Paygo has not been adhered to. The large tax cut that passed just a couple of years ago was $2.4 trillion. None of it was paid for. None of it was offset. And that was one of the contributors to the exploding debt or deficits that we saw. I would remind people that we were looking at trillion-dollar annual deficits even before that virus landed on our shore. So this was something that was baked in already. Unfortunately, the coronavirus has just blown it to new levels. But we're going to need to come together, and we can only do this in a bipartisan way to adhere to some budget discipline. And then hopefully with a growing economy in the coming years, we're going to be able to turn these deficits around again and get back on fiscal footing.
Question about healthcare initiatives. Medicare for all seems to be a bridge too far with narrow majorities. So what do you see in terms of healthcare reforms and the healthcare expenditures in general?
Well, I think there are things that can be and should be improved upon with the Affordable Care Act. I think we ought to look at the subsidy cliff right now, the premium tax credits that families get when they enter the exchange. There seems to be an awfully quick cutoff for who's eligible for that. That goes directly to the affordability issues. I think we can accelerate some of these alternative payment models, what I was talking about previously, so that it's value and quality-based payments and no longer fee-for-service or volume-based payments. That, I think, is going to be the key to transforming the healthcare system. I know our healthcare providers are moving in that direction already. The signals have been clear, but there are things that I'm trying to do as part of the Healthcare Innovation Caucus to accelerate that new payment method in healthcare so that we're going to be paying for the value of care that's given and not just the number of tests and procedures and things that oftentimes don't produce good results. That too will be an area of expansion, I feel. And I think you're right. I think a single payer is not there. I've got problems based on the chronically low reimbursement levels that our healthcare providers currently receive. Unless that gets addressed, I think we would set our healthcare providers up for failure in this area if we just lock in on those current payment levels. So there's some big issues there that need to get resolved as we move forward. But I'd also like to see, Joe, a greater emphasis on prevention care within our healthcare system. So much money is spent on the back end, especially with chronic disease management, when we could be doing more to encourage people to lead healthier lifestyles. And a lot of this is individual personal responsibility too, Joe. We know what we need to do. We need to get a little more exercise in our lives, eat healthier, stay away from the smokes and any drugs. And we need to be instilling this type of healthy lifestyle onto our children. And that's where the real battleground lies. So a lot of my attention throughout the years has been on children's health, on physical education in the school, making sure our kids are getting up and are leading active lifestyles. Because the greatest antidepressant ever invented, I believe, is good old-fashioned sweat and exercise and the endorphins that come from that. So I think we do need more focus on the upfront within our healthcare system so that we're creating healthier communities. Otherwise, if we're just reacting and paying at the back end, we're never going to win that battle.
Question about District of Columbia and Puerto Rican statehood. Do you see either of those going anywhere in this session?
Probably not this session, but we do need to come to grips with taxation without representation. And that's what we currently have over certain people who are paying federal taxes, but have no say in the halls of Congress over anything that we do.
Okay. Maggie, do you have any questions from the chat box? Okay. No?
Yeah, there's one. It's just a comment. It says the federal COVID-19 vaccination partnership with Walgreens and CVS to immunize residents and staff of skilled nursing facilities has worked great. And by Wednesday, all 4 skilled nursing homes that Bethany St. Joseph Corporation operates will have had the first round. We have had 100% of the residents take the vaccine. Over 75% of eligible staff at BSJ Care Center have been vaccinated. That's awesome, Craig. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, that's terrific news. That's why I'm staying in close touch with them and seeing how well the rollout is happening. And listen, Joe, you may recall that my own father's at the Onalaska Care Center. He's going to be 91 in 2 days. And our family visits have been window visits since last March. And trying to get the vaccine into the more vulnerable population certainly has been a priority for our frontline healthcare workers. I heard today during the healthcare Zoom meeting that I had that, especially in certain rural areas, they've already gone through the entire 1A distribution for vaccines, and they're looking to go to the 1B and the 1C, and they're being held back right now based on the rules that have been established. So one thing I'm working on is increasing the flexibility for our providers back home here to be able to move forward once they've checked the box and are capable of doing so. So those are some of the things that we're going to need to tweak and get feedback on as we move forward. But it does sound encouraging what's happening so far.
This question is a little more political. You voted for Speaker Pelosi as Speaker this time around. I know you voted against her in previous couple of years. Any comments about that and why you changed your mind, and give us a little background to it?
Yeah, Joe, you know, for years I've been calling for a change in leadership in both parties because it's so poisonous and it's so toxic. Well, Speaker Pelosi gave us this time. She's vowed this is her last term and she's on her way out. I've called on Kevin McCarthy to do the same thing, to give Congress and quite frankly, to give the nation a fresh start. Unfortunately, Kevin McCarthy is not interested in doing that. And he was the one leading the charge to overturn the federal election result last week. He was one of those that voted for the objection to the Electoral College. And as long as that exists at the highest level of our political leadership, it's hard for reconciliation to take place, hard for us to come together, as I think most people back home want us to. So Speaker Pelosi recognized that her end is coming up, and she's pledged to adhere to that. And with that assurance, I supported her moving forward in the next 2 years. I just wish we could get a fresh start across the board because I think our nation needs that right now.
Another political question, your future. I don't know if you've been thinking, you're starting a new term, of course, but are there any plans or thoughts about your future in Congress, possibly running for governor down the road or running for the U.S. Senate 2 years from now?
Well, Joe, this may not surprise you. No big announcements today. And I think, quite frankly, the last thing anyone wants to hear is some new campaign kicking off in the early stages of January after the horrible campaign season that we're coming out of. So I'm just going to leave it at that and make my prediction that the Packers are going to win the Super Bowl this year instead.
All right. We deserve that this time of year.
That's right.
Give me one last shot at your final words of wisdom as we enter a new period and a new year.
Listen, Joe, we had a tough year, and it was a real body blow to our country and to families back home here. Obviously, the events in Washington last week wasn't a great way to start 2021, but I really believe that good days are coming again. We're going to be able to get people vaccinated and protect their health, be able to start opening up this economy aggressively. There's so much pent-up energy to do that right now and exhaustion from the coronavirus. But we still need to share this common bond of affection as Americans. We cannot go down this dark alley that some of our leaders are trying to take us to create political fault lines, to hate each other. That it's no longer to have honest differences of opinion with policy and certain issues, but the other side is evil and not only needs to be defeated at the election box, but destroyed and have a mob ascend on our nation's capital where 5 people lost their lives. In the United States in the 21st century, we saw a hostile takeover of our government, at least for a few hours, until we were able to reconvene and finish the business of our nation. So I just encourage people to don't give up hope. And I think that right now, at this moment in our history, there are only 2 political parties in our country, the party of constitutionalists and the party of insurrectionists. Those who believe in the Constitution, the rule of law, in due process, and equal treatment for all of our citizens, or those who believe in insurrection and overturning valid election results and operating in the world of conspiracy and an alternative reality. Now, that's a choice that each of us are going to have to make. I can work any day of the week with my Republican colleagues who are constitutionalists, but if they're going to be purveyors of big lies and stirring up and fomenting revolution in our country, well, that's going to be difficult to reconcile. So I think that's a question for all of us at this moment to have to answer individually, is what do you believe in? The rule of law and the Constitution in our country, or mob rule? And the coming days, I think, are going to shed light on that question.
Thank you, Congressman, for that. I know you have a caucus meeting coming up in about 7 or 8 minutes. So I want to thank you, especially for joining us today. And thank you very much, especially for your candid and clear responses to the questions. And I'd like to thank also our audience who has joined us as well today. Maggie, do you have any last comments? Okay, thank you again, Congressman Kind.
Yeah, thanks, Joe, Maggie. Thank you all. And I look forward to getting together in person in 2021 for some of our chamber breakfast meetings again. How nice will that be?
Yeah, it'd be
Hang in
great.
there.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.